But the point remains that Trump approached a member of Congress who he had a close relationship with, who he had done favors for, and was expecting a favor in return, and that favor was...
What's going on, you guys? Today we have Joe Rogan getting slammed by Anna Kasparian. Joe Rogan was giving softball questions to Donald Trump. Anna Kasparian's calling him out. I'm giving my commentary as well. Let's watch.
I always got more publicity than other people, and it wasn't like I was trying. In fact, I don't know exactly why. Maybe you can tell me why.
Oh, I could definitely tell you. You said a lot of wild
Maybe. Maybe
You said a lot of wild and then CNN, in all their brilliance, by highlighting your wild made you much more popular.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump did the damn thing. He went on Rogan's podcast for a friendly 3-hour conversation with Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience. And look, Trump was his usual self. And I think in the grand scheme of things, this 3-hour conversation worked to Trump's advantage. I feel that it normalized him, humanized him, made him seem like a normal guy that will resonate with at least a huge portion of Rogan's audience. I also found it to be kind of dull, to be honest with you. It was a little boring, a little rambling. There was a fun part where they were talking about hot pilots. That, I perked up a little bit for that part of the conversation.
No, you gotta see this guy. He's out of Central Cast. He's so attractive. The pilot was so attractive, even better than Tom Cruise.
I was like, hot pilots? Where? Like, well, are they talking about?
And then a cop comes in. It turns out he's not even a cop. Starts stripping. It was amazing. Okay, he didn't say that last part. All right, so the part we just showed you, that was this best part. You're welcome. Because that was the only part where Joe Rogan held him accountable. Okay, because he has some wild crap. And he said it to his face. That's good. I like that. And Trump, actually, that was one of his better moments. Because when he goes, yeah, maybe. See, that's good. That's self-effacing.
Yeah.
That people can relate to that more instead of being defensive about it and whining, crying, etc. So that was actually the very best part of the interview. The rest of it, I agree with Anna. It actually made Trump look really good. But the huge problem was it was bereft, what a fun word, of all facts. All facts at all. Like, so if you watch that interview, you got a completely misleading view of who Donald Trump is.
I wouldn't say it was bereft of all facts. There were certainly a lot of untruths, okay? There were a lot of misleading statements by Trump, but he also said a few things that sounded insane to me. And I was like, that's not true. I gotta look this up. So he made a point, for instance.
And when Joe Rogan hosts Donald Trump and has him on his show, it ends up, it's not a show anymore. This becomes a 3-hour commercial. He's just, Joe Rogan is driving the polarization. He's allowing Trump to present himself unchallenged. And his actions, Donald Trump's actions, are causing serious consequences for these communities, for just marginalized communities in general. But it just goes under the rug whenever it's not challenged.
About how a huge amount of California's rainwater just gets flushed into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And the reason why we do that is to conserve a very specific tiny little fish. I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not the reason. Like, I knew that the majority of our rainwater was being flushed into the Pacific Ocean. I didn't realize that was the reason. That's literally the reason. I looked it up. So he says things that sound crazy that actually have truth behind them. But then he says things that sound like, oh, that sounds like that might make sense. And then you fact check that and it's like, no, that was complete and utter BS.
Yeah, there was a couple parts, like of course he's not gonna lie about 100% of the things. And you're right, sometimes like the raking of the forest we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But that's partly because he doesn't know how to speak, right?
So when he talks about something that I actually think is a good point, like the Native Americans did controlled burns. They did forest management due to wildfires. We don't do that, and there's a price to pay for not doing that. But rather than talk about controlled burns or fire management, he instead talks about raking the forests. So like, if you understand what he's really talking about and what he means, you'll give him a pass. But a lot of people don't know what he's talking about. So the idea that you're gonna rake the forest and that's the way you do forest management.
Well, see, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have the exact opposite problem, right? Kamala Harris is a talking point machine. You can't move her off the talking points. And Trump is so far off the talking points that it just doesn't even make sense. He's like, what, you didn't know raking the forest meant controlled burns? Yeah, no, nobody knew that because those two things are not the same words, and they're not the same phrases, and not the same concepts.
In Norway, they rake the forest.
The problem with California, they're not raking the forest. Okay, no, that's not exactly it. But anyways, but those are relatively benign. And by the way, if you want to have a debate about the fish, no problem, got you. But at least he's corrected. That is why we drain the water out into the Pacific.
Listen, I love those little fish, and I hear you, environmentalists who want to protect the fish. I'd like to protect humanity, and I don't want to have a conversation about literally rationing water when like 80% of our rainwater is being flushed into the Pacific.
And I'm glad they brought this part up because this is something that Donald Trump will do. He'll make it seem like something so crazy, like, oh, we're doing all of this stuff to, we're taking the rainwater out of California and to protect this one fish, so that he can get everyone on board, so that they can, cut this, cut it out and not, preserve the environment. But he doesn't care about the actual people. He's out here virtue signaling for the people. If you don't believe me, ask Flint. Ask Jackson, Mississippi. Ask these people over there. They're still not getting clean water. None of that is getting changed. It's not about the people. It's about what can these corporations do, to make as much money, to squeeze as much dollars and change out of where we're living, out of the earth. And that's what's going on. You talk about the Native Americans. The Native Americans did this without capitalism. They weren't trying to, harvest the land to sell to get more money and then harvest it until it's bone dry. That's not how it works. You have to work with the way that the land goes. But, that's not the case. And he doesn't care about the people. He cares about the corporations getting money.
Pacific Ocean, specifically to save one fish. There's got to be another way.
I hear you. That's a debate for another time. I agree with you, but others would debate us because 2-inch fish are more important than humans. But anyway, I'm being a jerk about it. We could have a fun conversation about that another day, but much more important stuff.
Okay, so there was a portion of the conversation that really caught my attention, mostly because of how brazen Trump was in sharing details about this. So it had to do with an interaction, a transactional relationship he had with a member of Congress years before he even ran for president. I will just preface this by saying I posted about it on social media and no one cared and everyone tried to justify it. But with that in mind, let's take a look.
So there was a congressman years before I ran, and I was very close to him. And I needed a license on something, and he was very important in getting the license. But it was a little bit controversial, the license, this particular thing that was being licensed. But I was close to this guy and helped him and everything else. And I went to him, I said, I'd like to have your help. And he said, let me take a look at it. I said, ooh, that's not too good. But I really hope you're going to help. And anyway, he tapped me along for a long period of time and ultimately didn't do it. And I said, you are a stiff. You could have done this thing so easy, et cetera. But it was controversial. He was in Congress for many years, like 28 years. And there's a reason when somebody's there for 28 years, you got to be sort of smart.
Right.
You have all the scandals. And I realized he was a survivor.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
let's get the irrelevant points out of the way. You are a stiff. Like there's that, and then I realized he was a survivor. Like I did not see that coming. I thought he was gonna berate the guy more. But to his credit, he didn't. He tried to make a point about how the guy seemed to be a little more careful because he wanted to survive in Congress. He didn't want to be dealing with scandal. But the point remains that Trump approached a member of Congress who he had a close relationship with, who he had done favors for, and was expecting a favor in return, and that favor was a questionable, controversial license.
Yeah, look, if you're MAGA, you could say, he didn't say.
If you guys like this recap, make sure to like and subscribe for more.
That he asked for something illegal, you guys are being unfair. You can make 100 excuses.
It's just a little controversial.
Right. Yeah. But if you're a normal person, you know what he was talking about, right? When Trump says, we were dealing with a licensing issue, and it was a little controversial, and this guy was a stiff. He wouldn't just do the thing that I asked him.
But he was a survivor.
And I'd already helped him out. That's super obvious what he's talking about. He'd give him a campaign donation, I presume, and that's a kind way of looking at it. I don't know if he gave him anything else. And then he was expecting for an illegal favor back, and the guy wouldn't do it. And you could tell that it was not the right thing to do because Trump then said he was smart not to do it. He was a survivor not to do it. Because if he had done it, he might not have survived. Why might he not survive? Because it was illegal. Okay, so we don't have him because he didn't say illegal and Rogan didn't follow up.
Right.
But this is exactly what's wrong with Trump. He's a mobster.
But
so he's done this his whole life. And I know what MAGA.
Can we have one person who's not corrupt in our government and who says, you know, who's basically in control of what's going on in the United States? Can we have one person who hasn't either attempted to do either just any type of corruption whatsoever, who hasn't attempted to buy out their way or has been bought out? That would just be so good if we could have one person. I don't know if there is. I mean, we have the president of the United States who, you know, some people might say, hey, at least he's being honest. Hey, well, how about that just doesn't go? How about someone knows to not steer away from, they know the game and they don't participate in the game? How about that? You know, and you might say, oh, well, that's just how it goes. Well, why is that just how it goes? Why is that the way that we have settled for as people? Because we're not getting any buyback off of that. We're not making any money off of what these politicians get. They make a lot of money getting bought out. They make a lot of these other institutions are getting a lot of money by buying out these the government officials to change the policies, and they're making a lot of money from there. You know who's losing money? You know who's not able to afford their daily amount of living? I can tell you. We look at these same people every day. We go in the mirror. We look in the mirror every day. This is how it goes. But no, we're going to say, hey, at least he's being honest that he's, you know, trying to cheat us out of money. At least he's being honest that he wants to be corrupt. That's good. And it's like, is it that great? Is it that good? Maybe for right now. Maybe it's good that it's all out in the open. But eventually, I'm just asking, please, can we have somebody who's not going to just have a paycheck over their way of being? You know, they can't just completely sell their soul for whatever they want to do. It doesn't make sense to me. Like it or not, though, that's it for today, guys. It's another day in the progressive way.